And I say that's my biggest takeaway from this album, even though that was something that was debuted during that time and was very much a sound of
like 20 years ago, yeah.
It still is something that I listen to and I'm like, this isn't just
a product of 2003.
SpeakEasy Studios. Speak and be heard.
Yo, this is Stephen Lee.
And I'm Frank Jackson.
And we are the Distinguished Critics. We're here to break down some of our favorite albums and songs and debate what's overrated, underrated, and everything in between. So join us as we go back and relive some of music's most iconic projects. Give us a listen wherever you get your podcasts, and please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and give us those 5 stars. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of This or That. I'm Stephen Lee, as always, joined by Frank Jackson, and today we are going to be discussing 2 albums that help push 2 superstars into the stratosphere. That's right, we're talking about T.I.'s Trap Music, released on August 19th, 2003, and Lil Wayne's The Carter 2, released on December 6th, 2005. Frank, how you doing today, man?
Good, man. I'm ready for this Southern showdown, and you know, at the risk of a little foreshadowing here, just want to say this is not as one-sided as some people may think by just hearing the names alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of cases when we do these episodes and you know, showing our age here a little bit, I'm 33 or 32, we end up discussing projects that maybe we can't recount how that was in real time when it dropped. And I feel like the nostalgia aspect of it is also what makes these episodes fun. These are 2 projects that really came out when we were just heavily getting into hip-hop, and really both of these artists kind of defined at least our high school years in terms of mainstream relevancy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just distinct memories of riding around, bumping it. You know, at that age, there was one person who had a car. There's always like just the one person you knew with a car.
Right.
But these are albums and artists that were on repeat all the time. You kind of driving around aimlessly with the sole purpose of listening to these albums again and again and again
seeing
until it's
which one,
basically
like,
a part of your DNA.
And seeing which one, like, you know, thumped hardest in the whip, because that was a huge factor at the time,
man,
too. Especially with, like, these 2 albums, because, you know, we're talking about Southern hip-hop. Yeah. So this is, like, you
had to have the subwoofers. You had to have, and which album hit the hardest when it came to that, and believe that will come into play when discussing these 2 albums, because they're very different in that regard. But yeah, this is early, very early T.I., and this is, you know, Wayne's been doing it forever, but this really was Wayne finally becoming something that was just massive, and we'll get into that in a second. But, you know, Wayne had been around for years, but this is the one that from here on there was no looking back.
Right.
Like, prior to this, there was no discussion about, like, oh, is this guy one of the greatest rappers? It wasn't even. That was like a laughable thing to bring up.
Not even on Cash Money was he considered.
Well, no,
the greatest rapper. So
not even close. He might have been 3rd or 4th on that roster at the time, and then, you know, things just catapulted from there, and he took over in a way that was really just nobody saw that coming.
I don't think we've ever seen anything like what Wayne did during that time period.
Yeah, especially in that regard of being one thing and becoming
and morphing into something else. Because you can sit here and I do want to start off with T.I., but just real quick on the Wayne subject, like the mixtape thing, right? Like 50 Cent, in my opinion, is the one that kind of started that wave. But you had artists that came through after and kind of made that like the basis for their whole career. And I think Wayne really built his reputation.
Well, he ended it
through the mixtape scene.
It was kind of it's not that nobody after him you know could use the blueprint of using mixtapes
as the vehicle to like drive your next project, or even just you as an artist relying solely on mixtapes.
He made it a hell of a lot harder for anybody who came
right
after him, because it was like if you're not bringing that, Wayne was going as hard on mixtapes as he was on albums.
I would argue he, in some cases, went a lot harder on mixtapes, and that's really what his fans, what they ended up wanting from him was the 32 bars instead of like, the hook and the. Let's start with T.I. though, because this album Trap Music came out 2 years before, roughly two and some change before the Carter 2, and T.I.'s story has always been interesting to me because. And I was telling, obviously we were talking about this before the show started. The first time I ever heard T.I. was not his debut album, I'm Serious. It wasn't Dope Boys in the Trap. It was on Tupac's Better Days album. And obviously a few songs on that were remixed by Jazzy Faye. T.I. had an in with Jazzy Faye. And I heard him and it was like, okay, he probably doesn't belong on a Pac record, but like he has lyrical skill, but he's still giving you like the whole Southern delivery. And when Trap Music comes out a year later, it's in the midst of like the crunk era.
Yep.
Like 2003, you can't escape crunk. I mean, Yin Yang Twins, Young Bloods, Little John, Petey Pablo, David Banner, Bone Crusher. All of these guys were riding huge success off that sound, which is that like derivative of it of 3-6 Mafia, but like that Atlanta chant and reaction type of sound. And T.I. comes out with this project, and it's not really crunk at all.
No,
he made appearances on a lot of these artists' songs, but like this is a totally different album. I think that this is Coke rap before Coke rap really became a thing.
Well, this was so important because this predates Gucci. This predates the emergence of Boosie and Webby.
Right.
This is even though T.I. didn't, as he claims, invent trap music, what he did was, because Atlanta was very much popping already, but what he did was create a different lane that Atlanta artists weren't doing. Outkast was already Outkast. Everybody you just named were already doing their thing. It was crunk. But
Luda was more of like the comedic rapper.
And just Luda had a more, it's hard to just very unique sounds. And so he wasn't doing any of the stuff that any of the rest of them was doing. T.I. really came in with the actual like gangster rap type of music. It was like you said, coke music. Like it was drug dealing music.
D-boy oriented. Like the whole album is going to be about selling
T.I.'s
crack
whole thing was about showing you another side of Atlanta that's not strip clubs.
Right.
And again, this predates Gucci. So people came along that were in this vein, but T.I. is the one who really launched that into the mainstream. And this album totally caught people off guard because I'm Serious. Even I like that album.
I think it's a good album.
It was a major flop.
Right. And that's what it was.
Major flop. And so this album being what it was, T.I. had hits immediately. I mean, like, and not just regional hits, not just hits that when you look back at it, it's like, oh, that was a banger. It's like, no, these were nationwide
hits at the time,
topping charts type of hits on not his debut album, but his coming out album.
Right.
And I think one thing that T.I. showed people, because the South at this time was still, and this is not that long ago when you think about it, the South still had that stigma about, they might be able to make music, but they can't really rap. Let me say this here definitively, T.I. is a spitter. When T.I. really wants to rap and showcase his lyricism, T.I. is a very good rapper. Like, he is a wordsmith. T.I. is, I think people know by now, you've seen enough of T.I. For better or worse, T.I. is a very smart dude, and he has a very broad vocabulary, and he uses it well. He showcases that in his songs, in his music, and he's very forward-thinking in some of the songs that he has. He was doing stuff that not a lot of people were doing at the time. Like, you look at a track like T.I. versus T.I.P., that was a brilliant song.
The alter ego.
Yeah. It was a brilliant song, and it was very introspective, and it was one of those things that you just weren't getting from hip-hop in general at the time, but especially from Atlanta or the South. T.I. brought something totally different to the table.
Yeah, I think people, like, it's 2023. Obviously, we're talking about an artist like T.I. He's still very much relevant in the mainstream, obviously not to the degree that he was in the early to mid 2000s, but anybody going into this project and expecting a trap sound like we've been hearing for the past 12, 13, 14 years, this isn't really that. It's more content-wise. I do think T.I. kind of opened some doors in terms of, my whole album is going to conceptually be about this, but I want to talk about the production, because obviously you mentioned how lyrical T.I. is on this album, and really he can still do that, like you said, when he wants to, but the production here is just so cohesive and so it's blended so well, because again, this doesn't sound like you're a Future album, or even like, a Rick Ross album with some trap heavy beats, Lex Luger, whoever. You have Kanye doing production on here.
Yep.
You have David Banner doing production on here. But for me, really, the driving vehicle of this whole project is DJ Toomp, and he's a producer that I think does not get enough credit. He did the major single off this album, 24s, and you recognize those chords and that bass immediately. It's like, whoa, this is an anthemic, like, classic Atlanta record, and he has a few of those on this album.
Yeah, he does. I think it should be noted, too, that this was created without the backing of a label. He really did elevate to his best self, got his best production, put together his best lyrics after he had left the label, because at the time T.I. had, as we mentioned, I'm Serious was major flop. He basically said that's because I didn't get pushed from the label.
Arista.
Which has been all but, confirmed, really. They had other people that they understandably were pushing out ahead of him, including the aforementioned Outkast.
Well, in fairness, real quick, just to Arista, like in 2001, a single like D-Boys in the Trap, they probably weren't looking at this artist as ever really having major crossover appeal.
Nor did they even understand what the hell that meant. That wasn't even a thing.
No.
Then, T.I. really did have to bring that to the forefront of hip-hop, of people's vocabularies, of, actually explaining them what it meant. Like, people in certain places in the South and in Atlanta might have known what that meant, but in general, that wasn't part of the hip-hop lexicon. You talking about the trap, that just wasn't something that really existed before then, which is why he lays claim to being really the father of trap and the inventor of trap. In some regards, he is. So, like you mentioned, this album just feels so extremely well put together, and for him to have, I think my favorite thing about this album, like we mentioned before, there's just hit after hit on it, which is shocking, but the body of work in totality, even just those album cuts that aren't the singles,
some of them sound like they could have been singles.
I was going to say,
without reaching to be a single.
He could have picked another 3 or 4 songs instead.
Like
that could have been singles. He really did put together just an overall
complete project.
A great overall cohesive album that nobody really saw coming. Not only just because, of what preceded it, because a lot of people didn't even know about I'm Serious. Like, it was that kind of flop. But
I was listening to hip hop at that time, and it didn't. Granted, we were younger, but it wasn't on the radar, and we were checking for a lot of projects back then.
And this dude just came out of nowhere with bangers.
Yeah.
So I think T.I. from the very beginning, which is, we're going to talk about Wayne in a little bit, but that's one heavy contrast between them. I think T.I. out the gate kind of showed you like what he's fully capable of. T.I. dropped between 03 and 08 6 consecutive platinum albums.
Yeah.
I mean, he really was like that streak of his, people people know, like you said, people know who T.I. is. He's not anywhere near some sort of unknown artist or, irrelevant or anything. But I'm not sure people understand that success-wise, T.I. is one of hip-hop's most successful artists of all time.
For sure.
When you look at that run, was very few people can even
pull that
sniff
off.
that.
You can name less than 10 other rappers that have had that
absolutely
type of stretch.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say, like for some guys, it's hard to say, will they ever owned a year? Well, T.I. in 2006 owned hip hop. I mean, like he was the biggest artist. Obviously, this predates that run by 3 years. But the thing with the singles, man, so the singles on this album are 24s, as mentioned. You have Be Easy. You have Let's Get Away. You have Rubber Band Man. And these all...
I thought Rubber Band Man was the hardest song
well,
ever.
they all hit so hard at the time, and they still sound great now. And I think the thing that you have to really tip, pun intended, your hat to T.I. on is the fact that they're all so different.
Oh, completely.
This wasn't...
There's
he didn't
not
drop
a single one of them that sounds like the other one. Like he just kind of...
like, oh, this
spun
is
it off of that.
Yeah, right. Like, okay, 24s is hot. Let me drop something similar sounding. Like, Let's Get Away is like that, the smooth, like the Mac, like, hey, let's get out of here. Jazzy Faye was on fire at that time.
Yeah,
like, he was, and I like Jazzy Faye. I thought he had an underrated run as well, but like, that's a perfect record that you can throw on with your girl. 24s is like, okay, you're getting ready to go out. You're about ready to have a good time. Rubber Band Man's that feel good, like you could work out to that song. Be Easy's like a little bit more personal, but the heavy piano keys and like I'm trying to think of many albums around that era, really the 2000s, that could say that they have like 4 strong classic singles coupled with the rest of the project being as tight-knit as it is.
Yes, it's incredibly difficult to pull off, and I think he deserves, it's so subjective when you talk about what is and isn't a classic. And I think, objectively speaking, this isn't viewed as a classic, maybe a regional classic for sure.
I think it's a hip hop classic up and down. And debate me on that, anybody, because it's one of those things.
So this is what I'm gonna say about that. If you look at the criteria to, in my eyes, to be called a classic, he checks every box.
Every box.
But I think if you kind of go around the country and ask people about this album, I think more people are going to say that it's a good album and not a classic.
Yeah, and I'll disagree forever.
I would disagree
on that
with.
stance.
Subjectively, it's a classic. Objectively, I think people probably don't view it that way. And I think it's, if you took this same exact album and somebody from the West Coast or from New York made it,
it'd be viewed as one of the
seminal classics
of that era, and especially with the impact that trap music as a whole has had. And I think if you poll people and they're saying no, it's not, maybe there's a little bit of a subconscious like, God, this birthed all this bullshit that we're hearing now, because
which would be fair if they were doing that, but unfair to the album.
They haven't listened to it if that's the basis of their criticism.
So you can do that with so many of the artists and albums of the time and say like that splintered off into this and that. You could say both of these artists that we're discussing today
helped push a lot of what hip-hop purists, and I'm not like
everyone
some backpacker.
Sounds like Atlanta now.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like some dusty backpacker that prefers like his hip-hop without the mainstream, or I don't need a hit single or anything like that. But like a lot of the stuff out now, because everybody has access to make music, it just sounds exactly the same to me.
It does, and it's all Atlanta. It's what Atlanta splintered into, and everyone took that sound, and they all sound like that. Like you said, I'm not here to really like shit on the mainstream or whatever it may be, even if it's not my cup of tea. But I am an old grumpy man, and at the end of the day, what has become is not in my opinion, what it started as quality-wise.
Right.
The quality was exceptional, and now it's become so watered down. I feel like a lot of people, if they kind of have the look and the voice, they can make the same song as the last person, and they'll be super relevant. And part of that is, there's so many, the world has changed so much since then. Social media, all this stuff, which, by the way, makes that 6-album platinum run that much more impressive. Platinum used to mean a hell of a lot more than it does
and
now. You used to have to go get that shit.
For sure. And just real quick, I think that the death of CDs occurred during T.I.'s time. Like in 2006, when he still was selling 1 million copies and it's being certified platinum or double platinum, a lot of veteran artists, a lot of newer artists that had sold records, they just weren't hitting those marks anymore because the iPod was out, because you could get music on LimeWire and BearShare and all these other different sites, and you burn CDs. And I would agree that it's definitely more of a single driven market now.
Absolutely.
But back then you could rely a little bit more on the brand of the artist to sell records. T.I. really didn't have any of that established when he dropped this, but this album planted the flag in terms of like, I'm here and I'm here to stay.
I think T.I. very well represents a self-made type of artist in terms of, which is coincidentally, we talk about, how things have changed between then and now. People go a lot more that direction now, where you can, because social media and all that. T.I. did it, in a time where that wasn't available to him. I'm not saying that as if he's like some superhero who wouldn't have done it if it were available to him. Of course he would have. That's a valuable asset. But he really did. He left the label and said, I'm going to do this shit on my own.
Yeah. Well, he was another artist too that like was pushing mixtapes around that time.
Right.
And I think
absolutely.
like after trap music, this is me personally, what I remember from T.I. post-trap music was he really got on the mixtapes heavy.
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing much of that before, but I know he was putting in work with your DJ dramas and stuff like that. T.I. on this album, I mean, do you when I look at it, it's hard for me to point at any one area and say that is the flaw. Like, are there any glaring issues with this?
Even if
like, what knocks it down a peg, if at all, for you?
I don't really think anything knocks it down. I would say, so when we do these things, we are looking at them as objectively as we possibly can. Of course, some of our own preferences are gonna play into it.
For sure.
But I could do, he has a few songs that are kind of for the women.
Right.
Not my cup of tea.
Are you talking about Let Me Tell You Why, or Let Me Tell You Something?
That's one.
I love that song.
I know. Okay, I'm just saying it's fine.
You got the Zap sample, the Roger Troutman, the talk box. See, I thought that was a song that he made where it was like, it's clearly aimed at the ladies, but it didn't feel like a Ja Rule song where he's like,
no, not at all. But if I'm skipping anything, it's those.
Yeah, I'm not skipping that one.
So I would say, if anything is skippable, it's that. But objectively, like, I'm not making that. That's what made this album that much more impressive. He literally did put together a project that had something for everyone who would want to listen to it. If you wanted to listen to this album, there's a song for you on it.
You're not going to listen to this and then be like, nah, I don't really like this guy. I would 99.9% of the time, I think if anybody were to listen to this for the first time, they're going to be like, even if you're looking at T.I. through the lens that we do now, where it's like he's caught some some notable
like
L's,
I said earlier,
for
better or worse, I think sometimes he shouldn't say everything he thinks.
Right. But if you look at this project and like you're not a fan of T.I. going into it and you're like, you know what, I'm going to give this a chance, you're going to listen to from 1 to 16.
Yeah.
I highly doubt you're going to be like, nah, that ain't it.
What's impressive about this is, as we get into talking about these projects, I always like to go and listen, even if I know something front to back, I've heard it a million times. I like to listen to it. At the very least, the couple days leading up to the discussion, right? Just to make sure that everything is fresh on my mind. And a lot of times what'll happen with albums with me is the songs that are the singles naturally are the ones who have been played and overplayed, and you're just tired of hearing them. But going back and listening to trap music, I had no inclination to skip any of those singles.
The major ones, right?
I wanted to listen to 24s. That's a banger. Like, I want to listen to that. I want to listen to Rubber Band Man. I want to listen to Let's Get Away. Like, all of those songs,
Easy, like they've all
aged so well to me that if it's something that he dropped today, it would still go hard. Like, it's none of those to me are trapped in the mid 2000s.
Right.
And I say that's my biggest takeaway from this album, even though that was something that was debuted during that time and was very much a sound of
like 20 years ago. Yeah.
It still is something that I listen to and I'm like, this isn't just
a product of 2003.
It's not trapped there.
Right.
No pun intended.
Right.
It's not trapped there. It aged well. Like, I can listen to this album forevermore and still think it's a great album, you know? So I would say that I don't think there's anything on it for me that I have too much of a qualm with I would say, like, oh, that takes this album down a notch. I don't think so, you know? What about
Well,
do you have any?
I mean, I look at it for like what it wants to be. I think it executed it flawlessly, right? Like, I don't think T.I. is trying to make an Illmatic. I don't think T.I. is trying to make an All Eyes on Me. I think that he kind of just went into the studio and was really hungry at the time and put together what he thought was the best music. And it shows in its timelessness that you can go back and listen to any of these singles that we've heard 1,000 times and they still sound so fresh. I think there are a few songs, and again, I'm not dropping it ranking wise because of this, but there are a few songs that do kind of just gel together, and in a lot of cases that works. But I probably could do without maybe one or two songs. It's not the ladies' cuts per se, but you know, one here, one there. I do like that. From a topic perspective, he still showed glimpses of being personal. Like, he had the song I Still Love You, talking about his dad and his daughter. And so he's showing that it's not all about like the trap or crunk or whatever was going on around that time. And I think that adds depth to the album.
Even when it came to talking about the trap and talking about selling drugs, he was still so... T.I. is a very underrated storyteller and picture painter. I think the angle that he took with some of these things, that, like, Doing My Job, I think is probably to me by far the most underrated song on this album.
Yeah.
That's a totally different kind of perspective where he's rapping to let's just call it working class people in the neighborhood that might look down on them because they're selling drugs. And basically his whole thing was, we just doing what we have to do. He's explaining, you know, like, I have to pay some of these bills. I know I'm a kid, but I have to pay some of these bills. I have to help my household. You looking down on me. I have a job that I have to do. Like, I don't want to be out here any more than you want me to be. It's basically, you know, one of those things where he's giving a totally different perspective that's not so much glorifying it as he is, like, wants you to empathize with the situation.
Right.
Like, I'm doing what I have to do.
And with this, it never really felt like he was just talking about selling crack for the sake of doing it or to make it sound cool. Like, you know, again, not to get on what's coming out now, but a lot of songs now are just like, yeah, I'm in the kitchen and I'm hitting it with the baking soda and the B12 and the whole nine. And like T.I., I felt like he was one of the last that kind of carried that message of the other side of the game with him too. So, I would call this a classic. I mean, I do. And I know we're getting ready to dive into the Carter 2, another very strong album, but I can't go back because I revisited it again today as well. I can't go back and find anything, and that's rare because it came out 20 years ago where I'm like, yeah, it was good, but this sounds dated. This is a little, you know.
As time goes on, I gain more appreciation for this album. I probably appreciate it more as an entire project now than I even did at the time.
Same.
So I'm gonna agree with you on that. This is certainly a classic to me. And
real quick, what's your favorite song then? And that's tough.
That's very tough. I mean, I probably would stick. I'll probably go with Doing My Job.
Okay.
Just because I feel like it's I don't know, that one resonates, and I'm not going against the grain just to not pick one of the singles here, because as we've stated before, I have no problem picking a single if I feel like it's the best song on the album.
Right.
I do think this one showcased his lyrical ability, his storytelling, and his ability to think outside the box and come at something that has been talked about a lot, but from a totally different type of angle.
Yeah.
If it wasn't that, I would say T.I. versus T.I.P. I love that shit, and for some of the same reasons.
Right. I'm going to go with 24s. I just think that, like,
there you go.
It encapsulated everything T.I. was at that time. Yeah. Obviously, he hit it big later on with songs like Whatever You Like and Swagger Like Us, but, like, T.I., like, raw and uncut, and he still got that flow in the lyrics and the delivery. And then, the bias for me seeps into, I remember that music video back in the day, and, like, it was like, whoa, who's that? So I'll probably go with 24s. If I had to pick, like, a deep album cut that I love, Bezel. Like, the 8-Ball and MJG feature, the Bun B, because, Pimp C's locked up at that time, but that beat, that could have been a single. Yep. So many of these songs could have been singles.
Absolutely.
Damn near flawless project.
I mean, starting on this album, and for the next damn near decade, he was just a certified hit maker.
Yeah.
He had hit after hit.
You couldn't name the top 5 rappers in the game and his name not be included in any capacity.
Absolutely.
Let's get into Wayne. So, Carter 2, December of 2005. A lot different than when I first heard him in December of 99, because I remember the first time I heard Lil Wayne, I believe it was on Back That Ass Up. I mean, a lot of people were probably introduced, and I know he had dropped songs before, but the wobbly, like all of that was Wayne back then.
So, you know what I compare this to? You know how in sports somebody will have like a couple of like average seasons, and then they'll just explode, like have some crazy season, and then they get drug tested because the league is kind of like, well, where did this shit come from?
Right.
So a lot of people accuse Wayne around this time of having a ghostwriter,
Gilly,
because he really did go from the dude who had, and let me state for the record here, my favorite Wayne is the early Wayne. Like, I love the
Cash
Block
Money,
Is Hot
the Cash
Wayne.
Money Millionaires era.
I love that Wayne. Like, that's just, it's special to me for different reasons, right? I have better memories with that. That plays a role into it. But his lyrical ability it really was one of those things where you kind of it was understandable why people questioned it, because it's like, am I going to suspend my disbelief here and just think that he just worked his way into being this good at rapping? Like, because he really didn't showcase anything close to that prior.
No.
And, this Wayne, even though Wayne went platinum on his first album and went gold twice after that, and then went
Lights
platinum
out and 500 Degrees,
and then went platinum on the Carter 1, the first Carter.
Right.
Still, after all that success, was nothing more than a regional star.
Correct.
And
Carter 1 showed glimpses of where this was going,
but he still wasn't he wasn't a nationwide superstar type of thing, right? But this album really, at that time, out of Cash Money, it was Juvie. Juvie was the one who was, nobody could have ever guessed in the years leading up to, when Wayne started the Carter series. Like, people would have laughed you out of a room if you said that Wayne would ever even be near Juvie's level of stardom, talent, lyrical ability, anything, because Juvie was a superstar.
Right.
And he was really the only one. BG was probably next.
Yeah, I would say BG certainly was next.
Yeah, BG
especially
was next.
If we're talking about the late 90s and early 2000s, BG was second in line.
And then I'd say it'd be the big timers, and then I would say it was Wayne.
I agree with that too. Wayne, The Block Is Hot. Real quick, I want to give you my perspective on Wayne throughout that time, since we're talking about basically a 6-year period. And that's being kind, because Wayne was a member of the Hot Boys prior to dropping a solo album.
Right.
And actually, his first album was a joint album with BG called the BG's True Stories. And, you know, prepubescent Wayne, you wouldn't even know it's him. They called him Baby D at the time. But let's just go from like The Block is Hot up to Carter 2. Wayne said several times, and now it all makes sense, that his favorite rapper of all time is Missy Elliott. And you can tell with a lot of like his delivery and how he used to rap. Manny Fresh pointed this out. Like when you hear him doing that beep, beep, or like the noises that he would make, that's very much like a Missy type of approach, being unorthodox and artistic. I think sometime around 2002, when Juvie and BG and Turk and all of them started to leave, you saw Wayne kind of shift more towards, he was still on Manny Beats, but like the delivery went from like faux Missy Elliott to almost like a Jay-Z type of delivery. Now, if you listen to Gilly the Kid, I mean, you guys would know him as a podcast host now, but he was on Suave House way back in the day, and Wayne's flow on the first Carter is identical to Gilly the Kid.
Yeah.
Did he write the material? I don't know. If I had to guess, knowing Wayne and what he's put out since then, probably not. Was there some help in structuring the delivery?
I think that would be it.
Probably.
I think that would be it.
But 500 Degrees Wayne, you saw glimpses of it. Then he starts dropping these squad mixtapes. And the squad mixtapes are all a bunch of like New Orleans East dudes that bring kind of this Dipset New York type of, I hate this word, but like swagger really is the word, like this aura. And you start to see Wayne transitioning a little bit. The first Carter comes out and it's like, whoa, he stepped his shit up. But I think with the Carter 2 and 2005 in particular, two things happen. You have the mixtapes really starting to get some buzz, in particular the Dedication. And
prior to that, he dropped the Drought 2.
He dropped the Drought 2. The Dedication was the one for me,
that's
though.
The one
that, like,
that's the one that really like took over.
But the second key thing that happened is Manny Fresh left. Yep. And I think if you look at...
It's his first album without any Manny production.
I hate saying this because it's going to sound blasphemous.
I feel the same way. I already know.
But I feel like Wayne was better for having lost Fresh.
Agreed.
Because Fresh and Cash Money's sound, and I'm not taking anything away from them lyrically, and they all did their thing, but Cash Money was very hook-driven. It, like, you know, get your roll on, number one stunner, back that ass. They had these big anthemic, like, you know, it was a Cash Money song. And as Wayne starts to transition towards this, I keep using Dipset as an example because, you know, him and Joel Santana were running together, and Dipset was buzzing with these.
Went into that lane.
This album sounds kind of like, there's a lot of East Coast elements to it, to me.
There are.
And his delivery is way more freestylish and Jay-Z in how effortless and breezy it really is. So I think the first single on this album was Fireman, and I think that's a perfect representation of what where Wayne saw his career going at that particular time.
Yeah, I think this is, you know, to that point, this is where Wayne was finally kind of like he wasn't in a place of back against the wall commercially because he was selling,
right,
but he was in a place artistically where it's like, okay, because there's two sides to being with Cash Money, right? There's the side we just talked about where it kind of puts you in a box. This is our blueprint, this is the cookie cutout,
and I love that blueprint.
Me too. But there's also the other side of that, which is like, now, okay, now you're not in that box anymore, but that means that you have to be your own thing. What you can't do is the first time you're without them, make some shit that sounds like that. It has to be different than that, or else you're just him forever. This was a massive album for him because
I would argue it's the most important, even more important than the Carter.
This made him.
Yeah, I think this album made him. He transitioned in just that year and a half span. He went from like really doubling his vocals, and he still kind of had that, I don't want to call it squealish, but he had that kind of Wayne delivery that you were accustomed to.
It was squealish.
On the Carter too, like he just sounds like an MC that hasn't eaten in years. Like, bro, he's from the time this album's like 22 songs long, and there are, a few skits littered throughout. All of them, to be honest, I could do without because they're like, 10 to 20 seconds, whatever it is. But I say that to say this being a long album doesn't hurt an artist like Lil Wayne, because what fans want from Wayne is him just bar-centric, spitting over tracks onto the next one. And he gives you that tenfold on this album, from it starting off with The Mob to Fly In to like the underrated lock and Load with like a nice Corrupt feature. Wayne didn't really lean on anybody else for this project. Obviously, he had Corrupt on it. He had Currency on it. There's like a Robin Thicke feature, but this feels like a Wayne mixtape in crystallized album form. I think this is Wayne, in my opinion, at his absolute best, because every song, he's just tearing this shit up, man.
The crazy part is when it comes to this album, to me, we just spoke about how on I'm Serious, you could have had, 3 other songs that could have been singles. There's like...
Or on Trap Music, you mean?
On Trap Music. Yeah. There's like 10 songs on this album that could have and should have been If Wayne wanted to, he could have had damn near like the length of someone's album in singles.
Yeah.
On this album. It was that good, where it was like, there's been very few things, the Carter 2, Get Rich or Die Trying, just in our lifetime of listening to hip hop. We were only 4 when Doggy Style came out, but like there's been very few things that have hit this way.
Well, I don't think Carter 2 hit that way. I think
it did
musically.
In my world.
I think Carter 3 was that one that was like the big one, and everybody was on board and waiting for that to drop.
I just meant for like it totally consuming. Like, this is all that I listen to. This and Get Rich or Die Trying are the only 2 albums from like people who weren't already like
your favorites,
artists,
your Trick Daddy,
I just listen to nonstop on repeat. Like, they dropped it, and I'm like, I have to listen to this every day, all the time,
right?
No matter what. It was one of those things. This is absolutely him at his creative apex. This showed you what he really can be. And nobody, part of what that huge appeal was and what swept so many people up in it is what he used to be. It played such a major part because there was that shock factor of like,
you had known him for years, but what is this?
Had this or what?
I think even features, because Wayne later took that to another level. Like, you got a taste of that when he was on Destiny's Child's Soldier record. Mm-hmm. And it was like, whoa, this is a different Wayne. It's funny, man, because around this time, and I really loved this album at the time, but just to show you where I was at with it, this came out when we were like, 15, 16 years old,
yep.
Where I was such a BG fan that and they were going through their own thing. I
didn't even want to give it no love.
I didn't want to give it love like that because I'm like, fuck Wayne, like I'm buying the Heart of the Streets, not Carter 2. I never bought this album, but I had to acknowledge, like, damn, man, he's, it's different. And, for this to come out at the end of 2005, and then you saw what 2006 and 2007 was for Wayne in terms of that mixtape run that we will never see again. No. You're never going to see anything like that again. And I think a lot of that started with this project because of how he approached it, that he doesn't need the singer on the chorus and 3 traditional 16-bar verses. Wayne can spit for 4 minutes, and what he's saying and his delivery is so sharp that it could be a single, and that's why I think, I agree with you. You could have picked 10 or 11. Grown Man, You could have picked Receipts. You could have picked
you could have
Weezy
picked
F Baby. You could have picked
More Fire.
any one
you
of
could
these.
have picked Hit 'Em Up.
All of them.
I mean,
Oh, yeah,
I'm
Hit
a
'Em Up.
D-boy. You could have picked.
I'm a D-boy's funny because I think that's the one song on the entire album that has like the classic Manny feel.
Yes,
but it was
does.
but it was
Yes,
just
it
enough
does.
New Orleans but he was still spitting on it. It's like,
Yep.
okay, there's the piece of like of that, but like the rest of the album, again, I think it's more of an MC's album. Production wise, like there's you're not getting the screwed up hooks. Like, I know Money on My Mind, but you're not getting like the cliche screwed up hooks or like it just felt like he was a lyrical assassin.
So to the point of what you were saying with the Carter 3 really being the one that like
blew him up to teeny boppers and the little white kids and shit.
Like status in hip hop. A lot of that had to do with right at that time. By then, everyone wants to work with Lil Wayne. He had a lot of features on that album.
Bro, you can't even begin to think of like.
And on the Carter 2, that's what makes the Carter 2, you know, like his apex to me is this was Wayne as just that one man wrecking crew.
Exactly.
Like he was out here with bars. Like from the very beginning, the intro is 5 minutes, no hook, bars. Like he's just giving you.
That song is so good too.
It's so good.
It's so good. Man. It's like a perfect intro to what like you're gonna get from this entire project.
No, it's perfect. I mean, it's it's 22 tracks. Yeah, it's a little beefy,
long in the tooth. Yeah,
but Wayne is giving you unlimited bars on this album. Like he is a one-man wrecking crew, and again, nobody ever saw that coming.
And it still sounds. This is another album like Trap Music that still sounds incredibly fresh.
Oh, this is aged incredibly well.
I enjoy it more now in 2023 than I ever could have in 2005.
Yeah, I didn't. Well, at the time, like as much as I loved it then, if you would have asked me, in 20 years, are you still gonna be bumping this? I probably would have even then been like, probably not.
Yeah.
Probably
like
not.
It's a good album. I like this,
Yeah.
but I think, what Wayne became, and there was definitely the decline. Wayne stands, sorry, but it did happen.
I mean, yeah.
When you go back and look at this now, it makes me appreciate, his abilities and his delivery and his growth that much more, because I think that this is, again, for what it wants to be, which is an open, like I'm displaying my skills here. I'm not going for no classic album. It just felt like he just wanted to get on there and rap. And in doing so, I would consider this his classic.
This album is so fucking good. It really is.
It is.
Like this album is
like
so.
You're sitting there going through the track list
good.
and you're like, yeah, I love this song.
It's
this
just
song
crazy
is a banger.
when you look
Hustler
at-
Music is another one where it's just
There's
like,
so many. There's so many.
what's your favorite? Water gun to your head. You got to pick one.
Probably Hit 'Em Up.
Yeah. That's got a great hook
between the beat, the hook,
you gotta hit
him
up.
just spitting like I mean that's Wayne, like that's peak Wayne to
Right.
me. That's really total package. Like so again, sorry Wayne stands, but not really. I don't care. When people refer to, because to this newer generation of rap fans, he is their GOAT.
Oh, he's their big, their Pac, their whoever you would consider.
And to me, that's laughable. But I understand why.
Right.
I understand why, right? Because he does have an incredible body of work, and he is super talented in a rare way.
Well, and living through it, you felt that too.
Right.
Like, yeah.
But you really understand it when you look at, like, I'm talking about how, Hit 'Em Up is just that total package, Apex Wayne. Like, if you were there for that, or if you know that, if you love that, then it's like, well, when he's on that level, he's on anyone's level.
See, I would like a lot of people probably viewed Wayne's culmination as a superstar with the Carter 3. I don't think that it's nearly as strong of a record as Carter 2.
I think it was before that.
And the same could probably be said for T.I. I think his biggest mainstream successes were King and Paper Trail. But if you're looking at what his best is, I think you're talking Trap Music or Urban Legend. And
Trap Music or Urban Legend.
And I think with Wayne, you're talking about the Carter or the Carter 2.
Right. And I think in Wayne's case, I love the Carter, I love the Carter. Like I love that album.
Right.
But the Carter 2 is like the hands down winner in Wayne's catalog, and that is saying a lot because Wayne had his run to, even though like to
Wayne's
us,
had separate runs.
Yes, he has. Yeah. Yes, he has. And to be fair, and maybe except for this latest one, this is some Tom Brady shit. They're all Hall of Fame careers.
Right.
He has like several different Hall of Fame careers, but even with all that being said, I think the Carter 2 is like easily, to me, that's him at his height.
I agree.
And that height is as high as anyone can be. Like, it's almost untouchable. You have to be the best of the very best that's ever done it. That's when he's at that level, that's when I feel like it's totally rational to bring him up with, I'm not going to get into all of it because there's so many names and depends on what area you're from, and I'm not going to do that. But with those legends that always get brought up, that's where his name deserves to be where theirs are when you look at a project like this.
I agree, and I'm not saying that the Carter 2 is on the level of Illmatic or Machiavelli, but I think of what you're looking at with Wayne, and like the best version of him is the Carter 2. I think that like the hunger was still there, the burnout wasn't there. With the Carter 3, there were expectations to have bigger and more crossover centric singles. And he didn't reach for that here. It was almost like, I wanted to prove that I belong in the conversations with, he's got the best rapper alive on here. Before he was saying, I'm the greatest rapper since the greatest retired, and he's kind of, this is the evolution of Wayne saying, no, now I'm just the best rapper alive.
Yep.
Like,
and had every damn right to claim that.
He could back it up. I'm never going to take that away from Wayne. Regardless of my opinion on his music, post-Carter 3, that rebirth garbage and a lot of the shit he's put out in years later, I will never take away from Wayne just how much of a skilled talent he is, that when he's on. His lyrics are still on point to this day. It's just the delivery and the voice and everything. It's changed so much.
To, God, please, don't get all pissy in my mentions, but Eminem, who can still spit.
That's fair.
Who can still, his lyrics, I mean, he can still spit like nobody can, but the delivery is atrocious. It just sounds so bad. It's nowhere near like the Slim Shady version of him. And to me, it's similar with Wayne. Like, Wayne still has bars for days, but it's just, it doesn't sound good.
It doesn't
anymore.
sound good. It's the voice, it's the method in which they're delivering it. And, we're talking about this album, and I did forget about this, but 2005, you know what else he did in 2005? Neck of the Woods. And that was a big, I still love that song.
Yes, so, I can still listen to that anytime.
Having this sandwiched in between the genesis of his mixtape run and what he ended up becoming, and then knowing that, man, next year the mixtapes are coming through. He has Like Father, Like Son, which I think is another like real creative peak. It's as high as a Birdman record would ever be on my list, because he knew that Wayne was.
He had like songs like Leather So Soft, that
all
shit,
of those.
like that aged well. There's so many.
Well, we'll probably end up talking about that album at some point too, because I feel like that one, despite those big singles in Stuntin' Like My Daddy, doesn't get talked about enough.
It doesn't. It kind of gets lost in the catalog.
We'll save that. Maybe we'll compare that to like one of the Blackout albums or something like that in the future. But just knowing everything around Wayne at this time, and then still going back and listening to this project, taking all of that into consideration, it's, man, this is tough.
It was a whole one-man movement with him. It should also be noted, and this does matter, especially in a sport like hip-hop, Wayne was just like cool as shit at the time.
Right.
Like, everybody, he really was just like
transcendent. When he started rocking the Bape around
he
then.
Was wearing the Bape,
like,
and
there were a lot
just
of
like the dreads. Everybody kind of wanted to be like Wayne. Like, he just kind of was that thing.
Man, you saw it in subsequent years because Wayne started leaning towards Bape, and then it was dressing. And I got to give, even though I don't like him as an artist, like Jim Jones with like the rocker clothes and everything. Once Wayne latched onto that, everybody was doing that. So yes, Wayne now, but even going back 18 years or, just over 17 and listening to this album, it's like, no, Wayne was becoming that even back then.
Yeah.
You know, so this is tough, man. Like, I went back and forth on this all day, and before we decided to do this episode, I had never really given thought to trap music versus the Carter 2.
No.
I'll say this.
So I do think this was a
good comparison, because to me, these are two artists that I definitely respect and I enjoy a lot of their music. They're not my favorite artists of all time. I don't have them in a top 10 of any sort, but I'll acknowledge that they both have classic projects. And I think when you look at trap music, that's T.I.'s magnum opus. When you look at the Carter 2, I think that's Wayne's. Carter 3 is the big one, but I think that Carter 2 is his magnum opus. So where do you fall on these? I mean, it is kind of apples and oranges, but it's also not, because there's a lot of parallels with both of these projects. They both kind of changed the way hip-hop was moving a little bit at that time. Well, Wayne certainly.
I would say, but see, to me, I would say even more so that T.I. had a more lasting legacy. You know, it's like, to me, it's like T.I. changed the game because he introduced something that was not a thing prior to him, and so many people from his region and from other regions. I mean, look at what now you got, like, Chicago trap, you got UK trap, you got all of this shit that, like, the whole concept of trap started right there, and he gave birth to something that's a more lasting legacy,
influential
on hip hop than what Wayne did. And I'll say part of the reason for that, though, is because it's like if you watch Jordan highlights, that's not gonna make you turn into Jordan. Like, you can't become Jordan. Like, it's not. Don't aspire to be that. You're not gonna be that. If you listen to the Carter 2, like, look, it's easier to replicate the sound of trap music than it is to ever catch what the Carter 2 had.
Right.
And that's basically what I'm getting at with that. Is like, T.I. changed the game more, but this album, like, the Carter 2, is just one of the great albums in the history of hip hop.
So so just to be clear, because now we're coming down, you know,
well,
it's time for the verdict. So
it's kind of unfair.
Would you?
In a way.
So you consider the Carter 2 to be a hip hop classic, but not trap music?
No, trap music is, but
you think that you get more pushback?
Well, the Carter 2 is objectively that. I think everyone would agree with that.
Enough time has definitely passed too.
Yeah, I think everyone would agree with that. Whereas I think just people might push back more on Urban Legend
trap
being
music.
that trap music.
I mean, you're naming every album. You're naming every album but trap music.
The album that succeeded it.
Yeah.
But I think people will push back a little bit more on trap music because, one, is T.I. Lil Wayne's name just carries more with it, but
Wayne is still known primarily as an artist. I think T.I. is known for a lot of other things at this point. I mean, Wayne is too, but, like, I think when people think of T.I. right now, your first thought isn't, oh, you know, he's a great rapper.
Right.
People are still going to say that about Lil Wayne.
But I also will say another reason that people will push back on trap music is because that's one of those ones that is a hip-hop classic to me, but it also still very much a Southern album.
Yeah. Wayne, like we talked about, broke out of the Manny Fresh.
The Carter 2 is not a Southern album.
I think if he had tried to make this album over what Manny Fresh was doing in 2005, I don't think it would.
It's not hitting the same.
It wouldn't have hit the same. And I love Manny, but it was just a necessary departure from.
Oh, we would have got 4 or 5 mega bangers, definitely.
You even saw it
on the Carter.
Yeah,
you saw it.
Yeah,
but
and even with, like, Top Back that he did for T.I. later, Move Around for BG. It's like you're getting those type of songs.
Manny was doing the thing.
He's doing the chorus and all of that. Like, and I love Manny, but I think Wayne needed to make this album.
He did.
I'm gonna go with the Carter 2. And, man, I'm not going to lie.
And it's no disrespect at all to trap music. It's just, like, we gave trap music its proper credit.
Yeah.
The Carter 2 is just that.
This is, you know, we've recorded several episodes in this series, and for me, I think that this was the hardest one. And I didn't go into it anticipating that. I kind of was like, you know, I'm going trap music. because of the singles and because of how well it flowed together. But when I take a step back and look at all that was going on with Wayne and that album, and then just listen to it from front to back, and the type of skill that he was displaying technically around that time, and he was in the perfect pocket with his voice and his delivery. I think that this is the best Wayne album easily. I think that it is a hip hop. Both of these are hip hop classics. But if I really had to pick one or the other, I'm gonna take peak Wayne over T.I. at that juncture.
Agreed.
And that's not a knock on T.I. It's
not
just,
in the least.
Man, this was a real tough one.
Not in the least. I mean, it's like we mentioned. You know, T.I. had a run that he just so happened to be going up against peak Wayne in this. But again, T.I. had a run that you can barely even name 10 artists who have ever had, if that, the success that he had between 03 and 08. To drop 6 platinum albums in a row, I'm not sure people, I hope you understand how crazy that is, especially for that time.
Well, T.I. was bigger than Wayne in 03, 04,
yes,
05.
He was.
Like
yes,
that's
he was.
And I think especially 06, even though Wayne was super doing his thing in 2006, bro, T.I. had ATL out, he had King out.
No, he was
on
anthems. He was who you wanted.
I think the baton was passed the following year. I think it went from T.I., even though T.I. was still selling when he dropped that T.I. versus T.I.P. album.
And then Wayne, but it was clearly,
and Wayne is dropping all Drought 3 and all of these mixtapes, the Leak is coming out, and
Wayne just kept coming with it, and T.I. kind of
Yeah, so even though we agree here, this was easily the most difficult time I've had really sticking to one project and being married to that. And to be honest, man, in a month it could change, but right now, and I would say the majority of the time, I'm leaning towards Lil Wayne. You got any final thoughts?
No, I think again, I respect both of these artists, and I like taking a look back at the time and evaluating it through the prism of then and now.
Well, again, because we can't always do that.
Right. So being able to just look back at that time and what they were doing is crazy when you think about it. You know, at the time, you might not have the appreciation that you maybe properly should have had for something, and I found that to be the case with both of these albums, where I'm looking at it now as a 32-year-old man, and I didn't have the appreciation for these things when we were young that I have for them now, where it's like, man, those dudes were.
Well, it's kind of like how The Source would rate an album like 3 mics back in like 97, and then they revisit it, and then it's like a 5 mic thing. And I think that, not that I thought that these were just subpar projects, but I think that they sound much better now. Agreed. So, well, thanks guys for tuning in. We'll definitely be back next week with a new episode. In the meantime, please let us know what you think in the comments. See ya.
Thanks for giving us a listen. Give us your feedback and let us know how you really feel. Subscribe, rate, review, and we'll see you next week.